Hi, and welcome in to this webinar. When I teach this class in person, I ask the audience, how many of you think taxes will be higher in the future? And almost everyone agrees that taxes will probably be higher in the future. So this next 3 to 4 years until the year 2028, you need to be maximizing these tax savings for you. And that's what some of the things we're going to get in today. Hi, I'm Matt Goolsby. Thanks for tuning in. We want to ask you, are your core four covered? That's the core four areas in retirement we talk about: the finances, estate planning, taxes, and healthcare. You guys remember these folks, right? Well, I'm using a bunch of stories here today, and what you're about to see is true, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent, all right? But these stories that I'm going to share with you, they're real stories that have happened to us, and we want to share these messages with you so that hopefully you don't encounter these costly mistakes. Got to get the disclosure out of the way. None of this is intended to be legal or tax advice. If you need legal or tax advice, we'll talk about at the end of this presentation how you can come in and use 60 minutes of our time entirely complimentary, all right? But the top 10 retirement mistakes we see people make are, number one, surprise taxes. And if you're not getting tax advice before you start that pension, take the withdrawal out of your retirement account, start Social Security, you're probably setting yourself up for a tax surprise, and no one wants that. Another mistake we'll see people make is high fees. I see it all the time where people are being charged 1.5%, 2%, 2.5%, but you don't have to pay these high fees in retirement, especially if you're not getting the tax advice, estate planning help, and healthcare help with your retirement investments. Number three, worried about poor coordination. That's something we're going to focus on today. If you're not coordinating these professionals, whether it's your tax person, your investment person, your estate planning attorney, and your healthcare or your Medicare advisor, it can trip you up if you're not relaying important information to all these different professionals. And I believe, and I talk about this on our radio show pretty much weekly, that the retirement system in America is broken. And I'll get into what I mean more about that here in just a second. Speaking of Medicare, if you're already on Medicare and you've been on the same plan for around 5 or 6 years, it's really worth you to stay in touch with these changes and make sure you don't have any surprises come January or February when you go to the doctor or the pharmacy and you're not covered the way you thought you were. Another mistake we'll see is people that have doubts in their estate plan. Sometimes people don't even have an estate plan, and that can cost you or your loved ones big time. The average expense from one of our estate planning attorneys, they tell me, is 3 to 6% to run someone through probate. So if you're worth $100,000, that's $3,000 to $6,000 gone like that in court costs, attorney fees, and just wasted money, in my opinion. Maybe you're worth more than that. Say you're worth $1 million. That's $30,000 to $60,000. No one needs to be paying that for their estate to be probated, because you can have these things covered if you have the proper estate plan. Number 6, the widow's tax trap. I'm going to talk about this towards the end of this presentation, but unfortunately, people get caught up in this widow's tax trap where when they lose a spouse, they'll be down one of those Social Security checks, but that's when the surviving spouse goes and taps those retirement accounts even more to make up for, of course, the lost income on the Social Security check. But unfortunately, when you're single and not married, you're paying taxes faster on less money. I know it's a little confusing. We'll cover that here at the end of this class. Number 7, concerned about control. If you don't have a plan to manage your income as you age and keep pace with inflation, you need to. Number 8, Social Security. We get a lot of questions on Social Security. That's why we have our team that helps people figure out when the best time to take their Social Security is. Number 9, investment risk. If you're not taking enough risk, you're not keeping pace with inflation. But if you're taking too much risk, I met with a couple just the other day. They said, well, we can't afford another 2008 where we lose half of our nest egg. What do we do? There's strategies you can use and engage there, but oftentimes people don't think about that until they've had a big market correction. And that's not the time to be thinking about it. The time to be thinking about it is maybe when the market's at all-time highs. And finally, the number one mistake I'll see people make in retirement is they don't want to be a burden to their children, but they don't have a plan to cover that. And you need to have a plan to cover that. Furthermore, if you don't have a long-term care plan, and I'm not necessarily talking about insurance, But if you don't have a long-term care plan, oftentimes your home becomes your long-term care policy. And what I mean by that is they make you sell it and spend that money for your care. And that's, in my opinion, one of the easiest things to protect, but oftentimes people don't even think about it until it's too late, unfortunately. Now, when I mentioned disorganized or no coordination earlier and how the retirement system in America is maybe not broken, but it's certainly flawed because all the responsibility is put on the retiree. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you have someone that helps you with your retirement or your investments, or whether it's a firm, an advisor, or a bank. You're meeting with that person probably on a regular basis. But in my opinion, that is probably the least qualified person to help you with all the issues that can happen to you throughout your retirement. Say you have questions on, do you need an estate plan? Well, I don't know. Do I need a will or a trust, or what's the best plan for my situation? I get questions like that as a financial advisor all the time. But because we have the attorneys in-house here, we can go down the hall, bring the attorney into the conversation. But that's not how it works across most of America. Unfortunately, most of America, and maybe some of you out there, you've experienced this, you get referred to someone else. Well, hey, I have this other estate planning attorney that I send a lot of my clients to. Here's their card. Go ahead and get on their calendar and they'll take good care of you. But this person doesn't go with you to the meeting. This person pawns you off on this other maybe group or individual. And to me, I don't think that's very good, because sometimes my clients don't even know what to be asking. They don't even know the questions they need to be asking for their situation. Now, the same thing happens with tax advice. Well, maybe you're taking a withdrawal and you're like, hey, how much should I withhold out of this withdrawal that I'm taking? Well, we're not your tax advisor. Do you have someone that helps you with your taxes? And again, it's disconnected from the main loop. And of course, those Medicare reviews, you need to make sure you're staying up to date on as your health changes and as your health care plan, or maybe even the laws change, because we've seen some of that with the Inflation Reduction Act and this $2,000 maximum out of pocket. That was a big change to prescription drug plans, and I don't think they're done yet. And I want to point this out. If you're the only common denominator in this situation, you're the one that's having to relay all this information that is very important and that we're going to get into today, that catches a lot of people off guard. And unfortunately, they find out about these mistakes when it's too late. And that's not what we want. You need to be proactive with these things. Last thing I want to tell you here is, if you're the one that has to relay all this information to me, and I see it quite often when people are not working with a team, I see these things fall between the cracks. And you can't blame this person, you can't blame this person, you can't blame this person, or even this individual. You got to blame this person. And if it's up to you, if it's your responsibility, man, that's a heavy load to carry. So how's your estate plan? Let's talk about, what do you need to do with your estate plan? Well, if you don't have one, I encourage you to get one. I've seen too many times families have to go through the costly process of probate when they don't have a plan for their transferring their assets to the next generation, or maybe even their spouse. Now, when you're thinking about starting that estate plan, you want to think about where your assets. Do you have bank accounts, investment accounts, real estate, boats, toys, cars, RVs, all your stuff? And then after you take that inventory of what you've got there, then think about, what are your objectives? What do you want to happen when you're gone? Do you want your kids to get all the money all at once? What happens if your spouse remarries? We've seen a couple of examples here recently in our offices about this, and some people had the right plan, some people didn't have the right plan. Speaking of, let's talk about Ron and Deb. And remember, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Now, Ron and Deb, they're someone that work with me. How I met Ron and Deb is they came to one of my tax classes. And if you ever want to go see any of our classes, you can go to our website and find those in-person classes, or we, of course, record them to watch on demand here as webinars. But Ron and Deb, when they had both been previously married, this can complicate, or want to for sure add in extra maybe safeguards for your estate plan. Now, Ron and Deb, Ron did not have kids from his previous marriage, but Deb did. Deb had 2 daughters. And Deb had inherited a couple of years earlier, before meeting me, about $300,000 from her father in oil stocks and things of that nature. She discussed with her husband, Ron, and said, I would really like this to stay in my father's family. When I pass away, I'm speaking as though I'm Deb, Deb wants these accounts to go on to her kids. Ron didn't see any issues with that. But the problem was they created this trust, which they thought did that. But I think because they were the ones that having to relay all this information, they were the ones having to stay up on this. I think this was one of those instances where something fell between the cracks. See, their attorney wasn't working with their advisor, so they were the only common denominator. And when Deb passed, the trust actually said all the assets goes to her husband, Ron. Now, because the advisor and attorney were disconnected, Deb's father's legacy would have been in jeopardy here. And ask yourself this, if you're married and you pass away, do you trust who your spouse might remarry? And if you don't know who your spouse might remarry, you don't know if you can trust that person. And there's things you can put into place with a trust. So they're working now with our team and we've got that addressed. But again, that's a big, big risk that I don't think a lot of people consider is, what if you pass away early in retirement and your surviving spouse remarries? That can put a lot of the nest egg or the inheritance at risk because people can change beneficiaries after you're gone. And a trust can help protect that scenario from happening. Paying more in taxes. Do you guys want to pay more in taxes? Well, I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, when I asked that question in my class, most everyone thinks that taxes will have to be higher in the future. Now, let's talk about there's different kinds of taxes in retirement. You can have Social Security, and we'll talk briefly about how that functions. Regular income taxes, interest income, capital gains, retirement accounts, but tax-free monies. What I'll find is a lot of people don't have tax-free monies. And tax-free monies for your retirement can help you control taxes when taxes either go up or when you're right on the edge of that 12% to 22% tax bracket, it can save you some money. I've got some examples where I'm going to show you that. But when you have different types of tax status money, meaning like IRAs, 401ks, then your savings account, that's called non-qualified. If you can have tax-free as well, those three different types of tax statuses with money can help you control the taxes in the future. But a lot of people, like I mentioned, they don't have tax-free monies. So we'll show you, again, how you can sometimes move from some of the money from taxable to tax-free. Do that towards the end of this class. But the two types of monies that I find do not play well together is Social Security and these retirement accounts. And when I say they don't play well together, it's they oftentimes can cause you to pay more taxes than you even could realize. All right? Now, unfortunately, if you're watching this webinar and you're a retiree, you're probably thinking, well, Social Security and retirement, my IRA, my 401k, that's going to be my income in retirement. You need to pay special attention, and you're someone that really needs tax advice before you take any withdrawals or turn on any income. Let's get into this, but before we do, I want to show you the tax history of the United States. I'm going to show you the national debt with the top tax bracket. Going back to when the income tax system was introduced in 1914, the highest tax bracket was 7%, and the national debt was $3 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, the highest tax rate in history was in 1944, when the top tax bracket was 94%. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, I'll probably never be in the top tax bracket. Well, I need to tell you what the lowest tax bracket was in 1944. It was 23%, 23. That's quite a jump from today's lowest tax bracket of 10%. So I don't think taxes can, again, stay low forever because our government has just printed too much money, we've spent too much money, and I think people that have these IRAs, 401ks need to be doing something about it sooner than later. In 1944, the national debt was $200 billion with a B. Of course, tax rates have come down and our spending has certainly not. But the last time the tax rates came down to the top tax bracket being 37% was when they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017. And it was only meant to be temporary. It was meant to be from 2018 to the end of 2025. But then this past summer, they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill. and it supposedly made these tax brackets permanent. And permanent just means until someone else changes them, right? But back in 2018, doesn't seem that long ago, and then sometimes it seems long ago. In 2018, our national debt was $21.5 trillion. Now that sounds like a big number, right? Well, compared to where it is today at 37 trillion, now our national debt is out of control. This is why I stress to the people that come to my classes, and you watching this webinar, you need to make sure you're going to get tax advice. And you don't want to wait to get that tax advice when taxes go up. Now is the time to be getting tax advice. As a country, we're spending almost $2 trillion a year more than we're taking in. This is adding to inflation, and of course, it's going to add to our national debt as well. Now, how they tax your Social Security is they look at other income that you have, and that other income combined with half of your Social Security can oftentimes trigger more taxes on your Social Security depending on how much other income you have. Now, there's one kind of tax-free retirement account, and I'll talk a little bit about it at the end of this class, that does not get counted into this formula. But the problem is most of the time retirees do not have any kind of investments or any type of monies in those tax-free retirement accounts. And again, we'll share with you why I believe it's important to have at least some over there to help control future taxes. Now, when they look at these ingredients that go into taxing your Social Security, then they take a look at you as an individual or married. And there's 3 tiers here, 0%, 50%, 85%. And often it will depend on how much other income you have in your situation, and that'll factor into how much taxes or how much of your Social Security will be taxed for income tax purposes. So I've got this example here of Mark, and remember, Mark's name's been changed to protect his identity, and this is obviously not the real Mark. I threw up a picture of a Mark we all might know there. Mark's retired, and he has a taxable income here that we're going to talk about, but he's in retirement, and he wants to go do things, and he needs $1,000 to go on vacation. Well, how much in taxes does he owe on this $1,000? Well, we have to figure out what else is going on in his income situation to even try to understand that. He's got a taxable income of $32,775, but he's taking $38,000 a year out of his retirement accounts, which is all pre-tax. It's not that tax-free kind. And he's receiving $25,000 in Social Security benefits. So if you can do the math, that's $63,000 of income, but he's only being taxed on about half of it. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and we'll get into that in a second. But Mark, when he calls for this withdrawal, hey, Mr. Financial Advisor, can you send me $1,000? I want to go on vacation and I need some spending money. Maybe pay for the hotel, get a t-shirt, do whatever. Oh, sure, Mark. Do you want us to withhold taxes? Yeah. Don't like owing taxes come tax time. How much should I withhold? Well, Mark, we're your financial advisor. We're not your tax advisor. And if you've experienced a conversation like that, it's incredibly frustrating because you're thinking to yourself, no, hold on. You're my financial advisor. You're supposed to be helping me with all these things. And then you're pushing me off to someone else. And so maybe you have someone that helps you with your taxes, but you got to call them and play phone tag with them. Or maybe worse yet, maybe you look it up on the internet. And sometimes that doesn't always work. So Mark, he's going to look it up on the internet and he's going to say $32,775. I guess that puts me in this 12% tax bracket. And Mark's kind of right, but he's not right enough. And when he takes this withdrawal out, he's actually going to cause himself extra taxes. But before I share with you how those extra taxes function, I'm going to take a time out here and briefly talk about how tax brackets, or sometimes what we call them tax buckets, function. The first tax bracket is 10%. And when the income fills up that first tax bracket or bucket, those dollars are taxed at 10%. Then whatever flows over, or sometimes think of it like the overflow, it flows into the next tax bracket or bucket, and that tax bracket is 12%. Well, Mark, he thought he was in this 12% tax bracket, but can you believe he's actually going to be in like the 22? How? We'll get to that in just a second. Because I want to reinforce here, these tax brackets are made permanent. but do not be fooled. It's permanent until the next president or Congress decides to change them. And I don't think because of our debt, or if you want to say because of our spending, I don't think taxes will be this low forever. And you better be maximizing it so you don't hurt yourself tax-wise in the future. So let's take a look under the hood here. What really happens? And now what's interesting here is we've got some of the benefits from the one big beautiful bill. Because if you're over the age of 65, you could get an extra $6,000 deduction. And that can all come into play here. So before the trip and after the trip, or another way to say that is before he takes the $1,000 out and after he takes the $1,000 out, how he changes the tax on his income because of how the Social Security formula functions. He doesn't owe 12% on that $1,000. He owes $222, or again, about 22% on that $1,000. Now, tragically, when do you think Mark figures this out? It's normally when he goes and files his taxes, and that's too late. Mark needed tax advice before he took this withdrawal, and it cost him more in taxes. Let's take a look at another example here. You recognize this couple, right? Ron and Nance. They wanted to take a trip to Europe, and they already have some pretty good income. He's taking $110,000 a year out of his retirement account, which again, all pre-tax. To supplement the $40,800 they're receiving in combined Social Security benefits, okay? Now this trip to Europe, Ron just pulls a number kind of out of thin air and says, you know what? We've saved pretty good for retirement. I think we can just take out $10,000 and we can use that as spending money to go on this trip to Europe. Well, because they only have pre-tax retirement accounts to draw from, they're at a point with their income that they're actually going to start hurting themselves in the regards of this one big beautiful bill in this extra $6,000 bonus deduction because they're both over the age of 65, the real Ron and Nance. And if you take a look here, the income tax owed before the $10,000 withdrawal is $13,000, right? After, it's $16,000. So where Ron and Nance should be in a 22% tax bracket, they're actually paying 35% in taxes on this $10,000 withdrawal. Now ask yourself, if something's going to cost you a lot of money, when do you want to know about it? And if you're being truthful, you normally want to know about it before it costs you a lot of money. And that's what tax advice is all about. So those IRAs, 401ks, we've already talked a little bit about those, but now I want to talk about as one day, if you have those IRAs or 401ks, you will not be in control of your income. In a sense, I talk about this in one of our books. Are your retirement accounts ticking time bombs for tax purposes? Well, let's take a look here. We've got here Jane and Ted, and they're both age 63 in this example. Now, they're born prior to 1960. That makes their RMD age, the age they have to start taking money out of their retirement accounts, 73. Now, they've changed those ages around a little bit, and it's important to stay up on those changes because it can be a pretty stiff penalty if you don't have the money taken out of here. But again, that's why I think it's so important to have tax advice with your investment advice. So Jane and Ted, they have $1 million all pre-tax in their IRA. Now, let's say that doubles over the next 10 years. And when they turn 73, it's now $2 million. Well, the amount they would have to take out is a little more than 3.5%. And that total now is, in this example, $74,000. Now you can understand that's going to cause a lot of havoc with maybe your Social Security taxation, maybe your income taxes. It could cost you more for your Medicare premiums. We'll get into that in just a second. But what I'm trying to tell you here is if you've saved really well for retirement, it doesn't matter if you need this money or not. When you turn a certain age, Uncle Sam, the IRS, the US government, however you want to say it, they make you take money out of this account because they want the taxes on it. And I don't think taxes will be low forever. And you need to be doing something about this sooner than later. And if you have these higher income, what we're going to talk about here is if you have high income, it can actually cost you more for your Medicare premiums. And like I mentioned earlier, it might even cost you more in Social Security taxation. If your money doubles, your RMDs double, but your tax brackets probably won't. Speaking of tax brackets, this is what I mean by the widow's tax trap. So let's presume that Ted and Jane, let's say that Ted passed away, and then Jane turns 73, and she has a $74,000 required minimum distribution. Well, if you can see here, the top of the 12% tax bracket for a married couple this year is about $97,000. Well, if Jane loses her spouse, Ted, the next year she can't file as married. She has to file as single, unless of course she gets remarried. And I've never encouraged marrying for tax advice. That's not our policy we use around here. But for single filers, the top of the 12% tax bracket is around $49,000. So if she's getting $74,000 as a required minimum distribution, this is what I call the widow's tax trap. It hurts down the road when you lose that Social Security check. Maybe you go dip into these retirement accounts to make up for the loss of that Social Security check when you lose a spouse. But you'll be paying more in taxes faster on less money. This is a big surprise to a lot of people that lose their spouse. They don't understand, they don't adjust their withholdings, they don't consider it, and then they owe a bunch of money oftentimes when it comes to filing their tax return. Penalties in healthcare. Now, what you pay for your Medicare Part B and D will have to do with what your income was. So this is Mary, and Mary had no idea she could face extra healthcare costs. See, she had lost her spouse several years ago, and they had some rental properties. She didn't want the headaches anymore of being the landlord. So she sold 3 in 1 year and had almost $400,000 in capital gains. Now, that was a tax hit all on its own, but here's the surprise. Here's what most people don't realize. She had no idea that it could cost her more for her Medicare premiums, and that's called IRMA. And it added over $5,000 to her Medicare premiums in about a year and a half. This was like a sneaky tax or almost a surprise hit to Mary. And she just felt like the hits just kept on coming. She lost her spouse, she owed more in taxes, she sold these rentals to get out of the headaches, but that caused her even more headaches. There's sometimes tax strategies you can use to not put yourself in this situation, but unfortunately for the real life Mary, we didn't meet her until after this happened. Now, I talked about IRMA. I call it a sneaky tax. And oftentimes, people don't even realize this, that they've triggered it until it starts hitting them. And think about that. Do you notice the gaps in your knowledge or maybe your retirement plan when they only cause you problems? That's not the time to do anything about it. The time to do anything about it is before they become problems for you. Now, IRMA, it's an acronym for the government, stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And it's an additional amount that people will have to pay for their Medicare if they trigger these IRMA levels. And remember, one day, when you turn 73 or 75 or 72 or 70 and a half, whatever your RMD age is, that age where you have to take money out of the retirement accounts, this can be a surprise tax for people if you've saved really well in retirement. Back to these tax brackets or buckets. What we look at in the fourth quarter with our clients that we help with their tax advice and their investment advice, we see if they have any dollars left in their tax brackets or buckets. And if you have dollars left there, it can be to your advantage to do what's called a Roth conversion and use some of these dollars in these tax brackets or buckets that you're not using. And again, we do this during tax planning in the fourth quarter of the year. Now, some people are like, no, wait a minute, why do you do this in the fourth quarter of the year? Because when December 31st rolls around, you can't do anything that impacts the previous tax year. That's closed. It's in the books. It's history. When you go see your tax person in February, March, and April of the next year, they're just recording history. You can't do a Roth conversion in 2026 for the year 2025. You have to be in that calendar year. So what I think is so valuable and what I kind of call our secret sauce around here is the tax planning that the tax advisor and the investment advisor work together on. And we work through and think of it almost as practicing doing your tax return. And this can help identify opportunities and potential challenges before the end of the tax year closes. And oftentimes, people that can see this, it helps them make better decisions on withdrawals, Roth conversions, maybe gifts to their church or their charities, or maybe even their kids. But if you don't see your tax situation before it closes at the end of the year, it makes it hard to make a decision. And how do you know that you're making the best decision for you? Another way to say it is could the unknown be costing you more money and you not even realize it? Could you be like a Mark we talked about earlier, who thought he was in the 12% tax bracket, but he was actually in the 22? Could you be like Jane and Ted? When they have to take that large RMD out, is there ways that they can mitigate that? Maybe through what's called QCDs, qualified charitable distributions. There's so many different options for different people, but unfortunately, people do not realize what they have available to them until it's too late. And that's why working together with a team is so important. Now, I think working with a team actually can save you money. If you're working with another financial advisor out there, odds are sometimes our fees, most of the time, our fees are cheaper because we bundle all these services together. But I met with a gal the other day, let's call her Jan. And Jan said, you know, Matt, yeah, it's great that you're cheaper than my previous financial advisor, but really I can make more money, Matt. You know what I can't make? I can't make more time. And I thought, wow, that's so powerful. And it saves Jan time coming to one place and working with one team. And then she doesn't have to be the one in retirement relaying all the information and letting all those things potentially fall between the cracks. And if you need a complete team, come in and talk with us. We'll do that entirely complimentary, 60 minutes. The financial advisors at Market Advisor Group work alongside the healthcare advisors at Market Medicare Advisors, Market Tax Services with our tax advisors, and Eidelman Law Firm on our estate planning or legal questions. And if you can't answer with any confidence that you don't have any gaps in your plan, in your core 4 areas of retirement, come in and take advantage by scheduling what we call step 2. Because believe it or not, congratulations, you just finished step 1. Now that step 1 was either come to one of our in-person classes, have a 15-minute phone call with us by phone, or watch this webinar. And again, you've just completed step 1. So step 2 would be to come in, get to know us a little bit, ask us any questions you may have. And if that's all you need, we are not high pressure. We want you to tell us no if you don't think you're a good fit for us. But I'm telling you, more and more people are realizing, hey, this working with all you guys under one roof around the same table, this is a pretty great concept. So we are getting busier and busier, but find out for yourself what you could be missing and how this team approach could benefit you. If you don't think you're ready for that in-person or that 60-minute appointment with us by either Zoom or Teams or in person at any of our offices across Kansas City or Wichita, well, then you can schedule that 15-minute call with us. And that's back to step 1. Maybe you've got some questions that didn't get answered from this webinar, or maybe you've just got, maybe you're just a scenario where you don't know what questions to ask. That's oftentimes the case. That 15-minute phone call can help with any questions you have and maybe get some more clarity in your retirement. I'd encourage you to Google us. We're not some fly-by-night firm. We've got long established roots in your community. And this team approach, like I said, is getting more and more common as far as popular with people in retirement. But we have a weekly TV show and radio show, and feel free to check those out at our website. Our TV show is Eye on Retirement. We talk about that on our weekly TV show, these costly mistakes that people make in retirement because they didn't have a complete team helping them. Our weekly radio show is called Retire Hour, and that talks about the ever-changing landscape that is retirement. But I thank you for watching this webinar, and again, the link below there will allow you access to our calendar to schedule your 60-minute step 2 with this complete retirement team. We thank you for watching today, and I hope you learned something, and I hope your core 4 areas are covered for you in retirement.